Mr. Hegseth, how do you respond to the New Yorker article about you today? You misspent funds, mistreated women, were intoxicated on the job. Do you have any comment about that reporting at all?
Hey guys, not any questions.
A bunch of guys, kids.
Any comment about that reporting?
Well, I had to say they were 18 so they could be there.
Excited to meet with Coach. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to senators today. It's a great process. I respect it, and I look forward to it.
I'm glad y'all found my office.
It's like a gaggle in the locker room after that.
So that article suggests you have an alcohol problem. Do you have a problem with drinking or alcohol?
See you guys.
Today, former Fox and Friends weekend host Pete Hegseth, seen there in the office of Tommy Tuberville, was back at the Capitol for at least his third time in 3 weeks, meeting with senators, trying to convince them that he is qualified to lead the Department of Defense, the largest agency in the U.S. government, the most powerful army in the world. Now, this comes following a series of allegations concerning his drinking and mistreatment of women. 3 Republican sources now telling NBC News that as many as 6 Senate Republicans, perhaps more, are currently not comfortable supporting Hegseth's bid to lead the Pentagon. Of course, with the Republican votes in the Senate, he could only afford to lose 3 votes. Jane Mayer is a chief Washington correspondent for The New Yorker, who just wrote an incredible deep dive into Pete Hegseth and his pattern of alleged misconduct at the veterans organization that he was the head of. Jeff Charlotte's an author and journalist who wrote about Hegseth's extremism for religion dispatches, and they both join me now. It's great to have you both on. You've both been doing great reporting on this. Jane, let me just start with you. There were, the early reporting from the Washington Post about an allegation of sexual assault by a woman that Hegseth paid and had signed an NDA. He says they had a consensual sexual encounter and denies sexual assault on his part. And I think you could say, well, we don't know the truth of that. That's obviously a very serious allegation, but it doesn't directly speak to what kind of, say, manager he would be or how he would do it running an organization. In the case of the reporting you did, you basically show a lot of concerns from a bunch of people associated with the veterans organization he ran with his management and particularly around women and alcohol.
That's right. I mean, and the allegations just keep piling up, really. I think that's probably why his nomination seems so tenuous at this point. I mean, what I was reporting was that there was a whistleblower report that was it was written not just by one person, by a group of people who work for him at a group called Concerned Veterans for America. And I've interviewed several of the authors, and what they do, it's an 8-page report. It's really detailed. It has dates, places, times, lots and lots of names. I think there are 26 people named in it, and it describes a picture that is of very frequent serious intoxication on the part of Hegseth, and a lot of instances of sort of sexual impropriety, including a moment where his staff had to try to intervene to keep him from getting onto the stage at a strip club to which he brought sort of the top managers. Otherwise, he was going to be thrown out of the club. He was so drunk. And people just described, I mean, I've talked to now numerous people there. They have described him as drinking himself into the point where he has to be carried off to his room by people if he's on the road at a hotel room or whatever. And these are in his official duties he's carrying out the duties of the organization. He was leading a veterans organization. So, I mean, it was a very serious picture, and it wasn't just one whistleblower report either. There was a letter also from a former employee who described a situation where Pete Hegseth was closing down the bar at a particular hotel in 2015, and he and somebody else were chanting, kill all Muslims, in a drunken and violent way that the person who worked for the organization described as despicable. So, I mean, there are things like this and many, sort of jaw-dropping allegations in this report. And then now, of course, there's a new report out from NBC tonight that suggests that 10 people at Fox have said that he has, they've had concerns about the amount of drinking that he's done, even as recently as I think just when he was right before he was nominated by Trump. All of which is pretty interesting when you think about it, because Trump actually is very anti-alcohol.
Yes.
Because of his own family situation, and you really have to wonder how much of this was known to the transition staff. And of course, it's a huge concern to anybody who, for this particular job, running the Pentagon, where you have to be on alert and available to deal with world crises 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I want to read what Hegseth's lawyer sent when asked for comment, that they were not going to comment on outlandish claims laundered through the New Yorker by a petty and jealous, disgruntled former associate. And I want to read that NBC News reporting, which is that Pete Hegseth drank in ways concerned his colleagues at Fox News, according to 10 current and former Fox employees. 2 of these people said that more than a dozen occasions during his time as co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, which I would note is a weekend morning show, I believe it starts at 6 a.m., that they smelled alcohol on him before he went on air. One of the sources said they smelled alcohol on him as recently as last month and heard him complain about being hungover this fall. The Trump transition team spokesperson saying these are disgusting allegations, completely unfounded and false. Anyone peddling these defamatory lies is sickening. That is the sort of character management lane of critiques or concerns about Pete Hegseth. Jeff, you've been doing a lot of reporting on the kind of what I would say were ideological concerns. Basically, this is a person with a worldview that's kind of fundamentally at odds with liberal democratic norms, and that itself should be worrying as well.
Yeah, he's explicitly opposed to it. And what's interesting where this intersects with Jane's reporting is his book's like American Crusade, in which he calls Trump a crusader in chief, calls for a holy war, calls for arming yourself physically. That book, he has since said, wasn't theologically conservative enough. And he says something happened around 2018 that made him realize he had to turn to an even more militant expression of Christianity, which brings us to his most recent book, and which he says his earlier work talking about taking back education, shutting down government schools, training your children to do damage to the enemy, that this is what education is about, that was all soft, that was a political project. And he likens the project now, he borrows from the Bible, the story of Gideon, and he says he'd always heard the story wrong. He'd heard it as the wonderful story of Gideon. And instead, what he takes from it now is the need to purge internal enemies. He says the fight begins with the struggle against domestic enemies, and that Gideon doesn't rest easy having defeated his enemies, but, and this is Hegseth's words, he eliminates them all. Everyone must be killed. So he's almost gone from kill all Muslims to he is bringing his holy war home domestically.
I think both these sort of strains of concerns are obviously extremely alarming to myself. I think the former set of concerns, Jane, are the ones that are getting the attention, I would imagine, from Republican senators who in NBC News reporting are saying that they're not, that there are some real concerns. Just on the level, on the most basic level you talked about, this is the head of the world's most powerful military. Like, you just couldn't have a person who is blacked out at 4 a.m. running the Department of Defense. I mean, just realistically, if you had a world crisis.
I mean, I think that you're right. And I think also, of course, there's a history of the Senate rejecting blocking a nominee before for the Defense Department because of his drinking problem. And that's
Exactly.
John Tower in 1989. And so I think this is really not a partisan issue even. I think it's been a bipartisan concern in the past, as it was in 1989. It's a competency issue, and it's a national security issue. And I think that's why even people of on the Republican side of the ledger are very worried about this, rightfully so.
We're going to stay on this. Jane Mayer and Jeff Sharlet, both of them doing great reporting that I recommend you check out. Thank you both.